to the National Book Festival. I'm Wendy Maloney of the U.S. Copyright Office of the Library of Congress. Before we begin, please note that we are recording this presentation for later webcasting. If you ask a question during the presentation, then you are giving us permission to include you in the webcast. Also, please turn off all electronic devices. It is now my pleasure to introduce Sally Satel. Sally Satel is a psychiatrist and resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. From 1988 to 1993, she was an assistant professor at Yale University, where she remains a lecturer. Satel is the author of many scholarly articles and books, including Drug Treatment, The Case for Coercion, and PCMD, How Political Correctness is Corrupting Medicine. In Brainwashed, The Seductive Appeal of Mindless Neuroscience, published by Basic Books in 2013, she and co-author psychologist Scott O. Lilienfeld reveal how many of the real-world applications of human neuroscience gloss over its limitations and complexities, often obscuring the many factors in psychology that shape our behavior and identities. Satel and Lilienfeld analyze what brain scans and other neurotechnologies can and cannot tell us about ourselves, and they stress the complex nature of our selfhood, free will, and personal responsibility. Brainwashed was a finalist for the 2013 Los Angeles Times Book Prize in Science. Please welcome Sally Satel.
It's great to see everyone. Thank you. And little apologies about this, the slide projector. It's a little small, but most of my slides aren't very busy. So, in fact, my first slide is a copy of the cover of the book. And to be honest, right after we decided on that, I really thought of a better title. I want it to be 50 Shades of Gray Matter. And that's not just the play on the popular novel, but it's explicitly meant to evoke the concept of seduction. In this case, the seduction into certain beliefs about behavior that technologies like brain scanning can lead us to. And the epitome of seduction, I would say, in neuroscience is a brain scan, which is now the signature technology of modern neuroscience. In fact, someone said the brain scan has now replaced the atom, Bohr's atom, as the kind of the symbol of science. But so that's a brain scan, and it's really quite a wondrous thing. The reason why I consider it a perfect storm of seduction is really that so many forces converge on it. First, it's an absolutely dazzling technology. We're not going to go into that in too much depth. It's very complicated. I have a whole chapter on it in the book. But it's amazing technology, and like all technologies, it promises objectivity and a more scientific gaze. It's about the brain. Neuroscience, of course, is about the brain, which is a masterwork of nature. About 80 billion cells, or neurons, each communicating with thousands of others, which is more connections than the Milky Way. This is just some of them. It's the organ of the self, and people tend to think, understandably, that it can reveal all kinds of secrets about human nature. It's visual, and we are highly visual primates, which is not something you can say, for example, about genes. Anyone can see a brain scan. It's much harder to see nucleic acid. And lastly, there's almost an element of surprise that accompanies brain scans. People tend to think, especially people who are, not steeped in science, not particularly sophisticated in that realm, and why should they be? The average person reading the Science Times, like, oh my gosh, look, it's in the brain. It's in the brain. That's a very key phrase. Well, of course it's in the brain. All thoughts and emotions are in the brain. Where else would the biological correlates of behavior, emotion, and thinking be? They're not in the pancreas, they're in the brain. And you see headlines, of course, you've seen them. Political bias affects brain activity, accompanied by a brain scan. Math anxiety is in the brain. Well, of course it's in the brain. And as a psychiatrist, these kinds of headlines really annoy me. Proof that depression is real because we have a brain scan to show that, or anorexia, or PTSD, that now we know the suffering is real. Well, we knew it before. We didn't need a brain scan to tell us that. We need a brain scan to tell us some things. Right now, it's mainly in the realm of research. There aren't that many clinical applications, but a few, but in the realm of research, and very good research. But like so much of research, when it filters through the press and into the popular media, things get distorted. The phrase "in the brain" is seductive in another way, because it kind of carries an exculpatory whiff. The "don't blame me, don't blame my brain." And also the notion that if X lights up, you hear the phrase "lights up," which all that means is that there's increased activity in a particular area of the brain. There's always activity in the brain. If there's not, you're dead. Anyway, if X lights up, then Y behavior inevitably happens. And that is not the case either. And we'll be talking a lot about that. But you could see why that sort of conceit, the X lighting up and Y then inevitably following, it would be so appealing to trial lawyers. And indeed now there's a whole new field called neurolaw, which is looking at the implications of brain science for understanding the criminal mind. But it's a really nice story that that defense attorneys can tell. You know, "See, Your Honor, my client has this in his brain. He could not control himself. He could not form the intent needed to commit a crime." This is a misreading of neuroimaging. Sometimes, without question, people do have problems with their brains that render them legally insane, so that they are not culpable. All kinds of damage can happen to one's cognitive apparatus, rendering people either not culpable at all, or less culpable, let's say, so that they're not excused, but their sentence is mitigated. That happens clearly, but the point is that at this point in time, and things might change as the technology evolves, but at this point in time, we cannot distinguish who those people are through brain scans. We can't distinguish an impulse that is irresistible from one that was not resisted. This is a key point I want to return to as well. And finally, another misconception of popular readings of brain scans is the notion that you can actually pinpoint emotions, or subtle emotions or complex feelings. That's just simply not true. And in fact, that kind of activity has led to the phrase, some to accuse oversimplification of the reading of brain images as being akin to neophrenology. But that's original phrenology, but neophrenology. As if the brain is highly modular and specific areas of it are involved solely with certain kinds of reactions. Now, clearly, certain parts of the brain are more involved more heavily in mediating certain kinds of reactions. We know about the amygdala, for example. That's famously invoked when we talk about fear reactions, but that particular part of the brain also happens to figure very prominently in processing perceptions of novelty or surprise. So there's not a one-to-one correspondence. In fact, circuitry is really where it is. And all neuroscientists, of course, know this. And I mean, again, a lot of the problem here is how popular neuroscience has come through the media. There are some wonderful science journalists who know their background and they're very careful, and others a little less so. And then there's a whole crop of people called